Greetings. Welcome to Kestryl and Company. Today we're going to be talking about astrology, which is one of the many tools that pagans and other people use to both figure out what's going on in their lives and also to find out a little bit more about themselves. My guest today is Snowwolf, who's been doing astrology for some time, and we're going to find out a little bit more about this system. Thank you for coming on.
Well, you're going to find out. It's very good to be here, and you're going to find out a little bit more. Astrology is a study that a person can study for all of their lives and still not understand it completely.
Well, now that we've scared everyone out of wanting to try, let's do a little bit of the simplified version. Let's start a little bit with the history. How long has astrology been around?
Astrology has been around ever since we've known about things like stars and planets, and ever since man started watching the sky, really. But the roots of the science we know today as astrology, or rather the art we know today as astrology, come from probably Chaldea, the ancient Egyptians, back in the cradle of civilization, about 3,000 or 4,000 BC, was when it first started being written down.
You obviously haven't been in it that long, so why don't you tell us how long you've been doing it?
I picked it up when I was about 11 or 12, which means that at this point I've been doing it for a little over 20 years. And it took me a while to understand it, and it didn't really click for me until about 5 or 6 years ago, which was when the system started to make sense to me, and so I was able to start passing it on to other people.
Well, what do we start with? What are the basic tools to start with? What are the basic understandings so that if someone goes to a psychic fair or something and someone says, let me do your natal chart, what are they talking about doing your natal chart?
Well, when someone talks about doing a natal chart, what they're talking about is making a map of the sky when you're born. And that, it gets pretty complicated mathematically because there are a lot of things that have to go on to translate what happens within the sphere of the sky, to translate that to a flat piece of paper. I brought some tools along to kind of give people a physical representation of what I'm talking about. Suppose this is Earth, okay? This is Earth. I know it's not quite a ball, but it'll do for demonstration purposes. And the Earth floats in space, and it orbits around the sun. For astrological purposes and for astronomical purposes, the distances are so great that the Earth's orbit around the sun makes very little difference. And what we do in terms of mapping the sky is we start with the equator. And we extend the equator out along its normal axis so that it goes out into space. And keep in mind, this is nowhere near scale. When people talk about astronomical distances, they talk about things like peanuts in boxcars and walnuts in Chicago and baseballs in New York and things like that, which really doesn't make any sense to anybody, but just keep in mind that these distances are extremely great. So the equator extends out into space and becomes the celestial equator. And what we work with in astrology is something called the ecliptic, which is a different part of the sky. It's a different band. So I brought another band. This is actually an embroidery hoop, but it works for tools. The ecliptic is tilted so that when you look at the sky, what you see is something like this, if you were to draw lines to represent what we're talking about. Here's the Earth, my fist. This silver band is the equator, and this purple band would be the ecliptic. It's tilted. Okay. And it's tilted at about 17 degrees. So that when you take into account the tilt of the Earth, it actually looks something like this. Okay? And all the planets that we know of move within this band called the ecliptic. And when we talk about planets in astrology, we're also talking about the sun and moon, even though they're not connected in that way astronomically. They're not considered to be planets. For astrological purposes, they are.
So what's the basic information you need to have for a natal chart?
Okay. What I need to have for a natal chart is I need to know the time that you were born, which also has to include the day, year, and month. Okay. And also the time in local time. And then that gets translated into universal time. And time in astrology is very important. It's probably the most important thing. And there are a couple of different kinds of time that you have to reconcile in order to cast a birth chart. Local time is not the same thing as star time, so you have to do a mathematical conversion to have that make sense. And what happens when you get into a natal chart is you start with this physical three-dimensional space and you compress it into a flat space and put it on a piece of paper so it looks like a circle. And when you get it done, it looks something like this. This is what you call a house wheel, and this is how a natal chart is cast. It's a circle that represents the ecliptic, and everything's mashed into this one piece of paper. And this line represents the vertical line, the up and down line from where you're standing to a point directly overhead and directly underneath. And this line represents the horizon and runs from the eastern horizon to the western horizon. So when you look at a natal chart, what you're looking at is a flat picture of the sky as if you were looking south at the sky. Okay. Now these bands here are called houses. And the space that you're looking at is divided into 12 houses. And there are a number of different systems for doing that, but basically what it amounts to is a representation of 12 different spaces.
And what do the houses mean? What do they represent?
The houses represent different areas of a person's life, and they represent how the external environment impacts upon a person.
Okay.
So for instance, the first house, which is over here just below the ascendant line, is representative of a person's personality, what they project to the outside world, how they talk, how they appear, and even to a certain extent what they look like. We should back up for a minute and say that what we're looking at here is a map of a person. Astrology today has become almost a psychological tool. It's intended to represent a map of a person's soul or psyche. And when you're born, you're born at a certain time in the universe, and certain conditions are present in the universe. And the theory is that the condition of the universe is reflected within the person who's born at that time. So once you're able to read this map, you can understand how a person functions, what their capabilities are, what their talents are, whether they're going to be musical or mathematical or whatever.
So if the first house governs the personality and a good share of what that's about, let's go on and tell a little bit about the rest of the houses.
I'll go quickly through the houses. The second house has to do with your personal space, how you set up your environment, whether you're a neat person or a sloppy person, whether your bedroom is sensual or Spartan, how you handle your money, things like that. The third house has to do with communication, how you communicate, how you talk to people, whether you talk to people or not, or whether you keep everything inside. The fourth house has to do with your family, your intimate relationships, and how you function within that sphere, what that's going to be like for you. The fifth house is intimate relationships, friendships, how you feel about romance, whether you're romantic or a complete clod, that kind of stuff. The sixth house has to do, and the sixth house is over here, the sixth house has to do with work, what you do for work, and how physical your work is, because the sixth house also has to do with health. The seventh house has to do with one-on-one relationships, who you're going to marry, what kind of a mate you're looking for. The eighth house has to do with issues like sex, death, how you regenerate and transform yourself, how you grow spiritually. The ninth house, which is right up here next to this midheaven line, has to do with your philosophy, how you approach religion and spirituality and things like that. The 10th house has to do with your career, what you will choose to do for work. The 11th house is the kind of associations and clubs that you will join, and how you function within that sphere, whether you're going to be a joiner or an initiator in the social realm. And the 12th house is the one that I find the most interesting, because I have about 6 planets in the 12th house. Has to do with spirituality, the collective unconscious, karma. If you read some of the older books on astrology, they'll tell you that it has to do with prisons and mental hospitals. And what it really has to do with is hidden things and things that are underneath the surface. So that's a quick tour through the houses and a quick tour about what all these things are about. This point and this point are both very important. The ascendant is the sign that's on the eastern horizon when you were born. And it's also called the rising sign. And that, again, has a lot to do with the first house and how a person appears.
So when, for those of us women who have walked into a bar and had some guy walk up to you and say, "Hey baby, what's your sign?" What are they looking for? What do they want to know?
Okay, what they really want to know, I think, is who you are, how to approach you, what kind of things are going to push your buttons and things like that. Astrology really went through a lot of changes in the 60s, which is when all that "hey baby, what's your sign" started out, because it was kind of or at least my impression is that it was kind of a hippie thing. Okay, so.
But are they looking for your sun sign or your moon sign or your
Right.
rising sign?
Well, as you've pointed out, there's a lot more to it than just your sun sign, which is what most people are asking for when they say, "What's your sign?" Because that's the first thing that people really look at. There are 10 planets at this point, sometimes 11, depending on what astrologers you talk to. And
you might want to list those off real quick for those who don't
Yeah.
know about this.
Okay. As I said before, the sun and the moon are also considered planets in astrology, and the 2 most important. And then there's Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And the extra planet that I mentioned is called Chiron, and it's been recently discovered within the last 20 years. Most astrologers are just starting to work with it. There is a legend in astrology which says that each of the planets is associated with a particular sign, and therefore eventually there will be 12 planets. There's also another tradition in astrology which really messes people up, which says that there's actually a 13th sign, which really messes people up because the entire astrological system is based on 12s. Okay.
And it's plenty confusing enough without any more help.
Right. So when you talk about, to get back to what we were talking about before, to talk about a sun sign is you talk about what sign the sun is in when you're born. And the sun goes through each of the signs in about a month. It takes an entire year to go around the zodiac. So it's a very convenient way to kind of classify people a little bit.
I think it's kind of interesting, though, that the signs change at midpoints in the month from what our
Yes.
calendar,
Yes.
our current calendar,
Our
I should
current
say,
calendar,
goes.
yeah, our current calendar is based on the work of the Emperor Gregorian. We currently use the Gregorian calendar, I think. Yeah, Gregorian calendar. And there are other calendars. That's why we have the change in signs in the middle of the month that we have.
So one of the things I think that's confusing for people is when they see all of these funny little symbols that are supposed to represent the planets and the
Right.
signs, and I see
Okay.
that you have something that will sort of help to clarify that.
Well, I have something that will help to clarify it, but let me preface using this by saying that I said before that astrology is all based on 12s. Okay, we've talked about the 12 houses, and this diagram is a representation of the entire astrological system in about this much space, okay, which is pretty amazing. Let me see if I can hold this up so it makes a little more sense. All right, here we start with the first house is over here. And we'll smooth this out a little bit. As I said, each of the planets is associated with a sign, and each of the planets is associated with a house. What we have here is 3 bands. Mm-hmm. Okay, this inner band is the house system. Okay, 12 houses, which we talked about before. The next band is the planets. Okay, and the outer band is the signs that everyone is pretty familiar with. Starting here, we have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, the 12 signs. Each of these signs is associated with a house, which I said before was a division of the physical space, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. The houses in a natal chart always stay in the same area. The signs move in a 24-hour rotation. So when you talk about your rising sign, that's what you're talking about. You're really talking about what time of day you were born. Okay. These signs move this way so that you go through actually they move this way. So you go through each of the 12 signs every 24 hours. So that's one way of these circles sliding around each other. Each of the 12, 11 at this point, planets has a circle of its own. So each of the 12 planets also move around the zodiac with varying periods as as you get farther away from the sun. And if you want to remember the order of the planets, by the way, I have a little rhyme that you might be interested in. It goes like this. Mother very easily made jelly sandwiches using no peanuts, mayonnaise, or glue. The first letters of each of those words are the first letters of each of the planets. Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth. Mother very easily. Okay. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars made jam sandwiches, Jupiter and Saturn, using no peanuts, mayonnaise, or glues. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Mickey, and Goofy. Okay. Okay, so back to our chart wheel here. I teach a class which is called Pizza Wheel Astrology. So you can see what I'm talking about with the astrology pizza here. Okay. And starting from the ascendant, we have the symbol for Mars, for Venus, for Mercury, for the Moon, Sun, Mercury again because Mercury has 2 signs, Venus again because Venus has 2 signs, Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Okay. One of the signs that Mercury works with the 2 signs Gemini and Virgo. One of the signs that Mercury works with has been taken over by Chiron. Most astrologers think that it's the ruler of Virgo, okay, and therefore of the 6th house. In a similar way, the other outer planets like Uranus took over Aquarius from Saturn when it was discovered, and Neptune took over Pisces from Jupiter when it was discovered, and Pluto took over Scorpio from Mars when it was discovered. So astrology is
moving
also
on. Right.
Astrology is also an evolving science. But you can see that if I go through this real quickly, you'll understand how these things are linked, because remember we talked about the first house being the personality and how outgoing a person is. Mars has to do with the principle of assertion in a person's birth chart, how they assert themselves and how they go about getting what they want. And Aries, the sign that's associated with that, is also a sign concerned with impulse. Most people will tell you that Arians are very impulsive. They leap before they look. Okay. In a similar way, the second house, having to do with personal space, is associated with the planet Venus, which also has to do with personal space, your aesthetic sense, how you dress yourself, what you look like, how well you take care of yourself, and also is concerned with love relationships, and is associated with the sign Taurus, okay, which has to do with security and with giving yourself a solid base to work from. Okay, and it works the same way for all the other planets. Just tell me if you're getting bored, because I can drone on about this forever. Mercury has to do with communication and business, and so does the sign Gemini. And in a similar way, the moon has to do with motherhood and the family, and is associated with the sign Cancer.
Well, if this I assume can go right on around the wheel to the 12th house, but this particular one that you have with you, it looks like it's set up for an obvious purpose.
Yes, it is. It's set up for a very obvious purpose, because although it's a good illustration of the astrological system, what you do with this is we have a number of stones here.
For those who can't see them.
For those who can't see them.
There are lots of different colors and shapes and sizes.
One of the neat things about astrology is that it tends to be an entrance point for a lot of people into the kind of things that we're talking about, into occultism and esoteric studies. And the signs, the planets, and the houses are all connected with stones, with plants, with colors, lucky numbers, days of the week. You can make connections from the astrological system to almost anything.
I know that there's, I notice here that there's 10 stones and 12 houses.
Gee, how about that? Remember we have 10 planets?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Each of those stones has to do with a particular planet, for instance.
And I know that I can tell what the stones are. I don't know what they're attached to.
Mm-hmm.
This over here is amethyst.
Yes.
And as we go around, I guess you can tell a little bit.
Okay. For this system, I want to start with the tiger eye, which is associated with the sun. Okay. I would use tiger eye for the sun in this set.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next one we have to move to is the white one, or the moonstone, which of course is associated with the moon, this one here. And then the third one would be Mercury, for which I would use the fluorite.
Well, that's this little...
Right, this little octahedral one there. Then Venus would be the rose quartz.
Which is this one,
right?
Here, the pink.
Right. Mars is associated with carnelian, which is the orange one. For Jupiter, I would use either the amethyst or this blue one here, which I'm not sure what it is.
This is a blue lace agate.
Okay. Probably the sky blue one, because we'll put the amethyst with Uranus later on. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be Jupiter. This will be Saturn, because it's black. It's almost black.
Mm-hmm. That's a hawk's eye, or a blue tiger eye, by the way.
Right. Then the amethyst, as I said, would be Uranus. Mm-hmm. Neptune is this nice sea green kind of stone.
Adventuring.
Right, which is associated with Pisces and the sea. And then this picture agate I use for Pluto. And what you do with these is, this is an astrological divination tool. You take these stones and you drop them on the cloth, and then you interpret them according to the way they're lying. So for this style of divination, maybe we can move this a little bit here so we can get a clearer picture of it. For this particular divination, I would say that the two planets that are most central to this problem are Uranus and Saturn. So this is probably a problem that has to do with the changing of structures and the sudden flash of illumination that changes the form of what's going on, because Saturn has to do with tradition. Uranus has to do with illumination. Secondarily, the next two closest are Neptune and Pluto, both of which are planets of transformation. This Neptune has to do with the dissolution of things, the dissolving of forms. You can think of Neptune as looking out from an undersea grotto. You can see for a certain distance, but after that everything is misty and vague. This kind of green undersea light.
This seems like something that could go on and on and on.
Yeah. You can start with this. And this is a similar process to interpreting a birth chart, by the way, because each of the planets will be in a different sign and house. So you start with what looks most important, and then you go from there. And
if someone just wanted to go out and get a book on the basics that's easy to read and can just get them into the basics, and if they look or cast their own natal chart or get a copy of it somewhere, that they could get a little bit more understanding about it, what would be a good one to start with?
Well, first of all, you can get a natal chart done at a very reasonable price. One of the things that's happened...
What's a reasonable price?
A couple of dollars, probably, plus your stamp. Okay. There's a place called Astro Services in San Diego, and you can call them up on the phone and tell them your birth data, your date, time, and place of birth, and they will send you a complete natal chart, telling you where all your planets are. So you can do that. There are lots of people who do that kind of thing with personal computers. It's real easy because you don't have to do all the math. But a book that you can get, a good book to start with, is called The Only Way to Learn Astrology. It's a series. You can pick it up at almost any bookstore that deals with astrology at all. That's
it looks like this is a topic we're going to have to come back and talk more about. Yeah. I'm glad that you came and gave us a little bit of enlightenment here today, and we'll definitely do a second one on this topic again.
Very much so. We can probably do 12 or...
One for each house.
One for each house and sign.
Thank you for being on today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, and merry meet again. I hope you'll join us.